Is disability a tragedy? Is it a gift? What place is there for grief and for joy in this story of disability that so many of us are living within our families? I'm Amy Julia Becker, and this is Reimagining the Good Life, a podcast about challenging the assumptions about what makes life good, proclaiming the inherent belovedness of every human being, and envisioning a world of belonging where everyone matters. Today, I'm talking with Matt Mooney, co-founder of 99 Balloons, an organization that works with persons experiencing disability in over 50 locations across 13 states in the United States, as well as sites in Australia and Canada. Matt is also working on a PhD in Theological Ethics, and he has an autistic daughter, Lena. You'll get to hear more about Matt's story and his thinking in just a minute, but I wanted to give a little context for our conversation. So I reached out to Matt after RFK Jr., the current head of the Department of Health and Human Services, made public remarks in which he called autism a tragedy that destroys families. So I wanted some help naming the problematic thinking behind RFK's remarks, but I also wanted some help considering why so many parents of disabled kids might find solace in what RFK had to say. I read a beautiful essay by Emily May titled, "Kennedy Described My Daughter's Reality." It was an essay she wrote for the New York Times where this is her writing, Kennedy's remarks echo the reality and pain of a subset of parents of children with autism who feel left out of much of the conversation around the condition. Many advocacy groups focus so much on acceptance, inclusion, and celebrating neurodiversity that it can feel as if they're avoiding uncomfortable truths about children like mine. I'll link to her essay in the show notes, and I do commend it to you. I've been thinking about these issues myself for many years. Even though I do not have a child with autism, I do have a child with an intellectual disability, with Down syndrome. Will Penny have Down syndrome in heaven is a question I asked myself after she was born. It's one that other people ask me regularly. I wrote an essay for Vox a few years back about whether or not I would cure Penny of Down syndrome if I could, and I'll link to that essay in the show notes if you want a little more of my thinking. But all of this pondering, plus the lived experience of a child with an intellectual disability, and our introduction to the disability community more broadly, it's led me to a few conclusions, even though I still have so many ongoing questions. Here are the few conclusions that I have reached. One, that human brokenness and human limitations are not the same thing. Two, disability and suffering are not the same thing. Three, every human has limitations, brokenness, and possibility. And finally, 4, I will never have all the answers to all the questions. So that leads me back, and Matt speaks well to this in this episode, leads me back to the relationships that are actually at the heart of the matter. Our approach to disability as a society needs to make space for both lament and celebration, sorrow and joy, grief and embrace. I hope this conversation at least helps us to head in that direction. Thanks for joining us. Hello, Matt. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Hello.
All right. So Matt and his wife, Ginny, are the co-founders of 99 Balloons. And I wanted to start with 99 Balloons because this organization, if you go to their website, and we'll link to it in the show notes, states that the vision is to change the story of disability by proclaiming the worth and image-bearing beauty of each and every human being. So we'll get back to the vision, but first, will you just tell us the story of 99 Balloons?
Well, this happens to be the story of our lives, which is, to fast forward you through some of life, our first child, when Ginny and I were first pregnant, a few gray hairs ago, I believe it was about 37 weeks pregnant. We were kind of ushered into a doctor's office, and it was all fun and games and newborn baby fun. Mm-hmm. And then it took a little turn, and one doctor became 3 doctors, and they walked it down with their heads down very slowly and without words. We knew in that moment that something had changed. We didn't quite know what. And so they began to give us a diagnosis, not that day, but over time. That day they told us things aren't looking good. We don't quite know what. We got a lot of work to do here to figure things out. And so we began the journey that day of figuring out that our child would have a condition called trisomy 18. So many people are familiar, as you are, with Down syndrome, which is trisomy 21. So this is 3 instead of 2 chromosomes on what would be the 18th pair. So we found out, again, while we were pregnant, and we were kind of told this child may not make it to birth. This child may make it to birth. This child may live for seconds, may live for minutes, may live for days. We don't really know until this child gets here. So we didn't know if it was a boy or girl. Fast forward, it was a beautiful boy named Eliot, and Eliot lived for 99 days. And Eliot's life required around-the-clock care, and so that was an introduction to us of a different world, a different reality.
Yeah.
Really a time for our faith to see where we stood. And so that was Eliot. And to fast forward you through a lot, we started an organization called 99 Balloons out of Eliot's life, as you referenced the website. And so now we have the beautiful reality of living in community with people with disability through it. And we also have a daughter that we got to know through 99 Balloons and adopted from Ukraine, named Lena. Lena is 18. We will probably talk a little bit about Lena. She might be most of my stories today, but she has profound autism. She does not use words. She uses a few signs. She uses a device. She probably has about 20 to 30 words she uses consistently on that device. She could use more, but she doesn't want to. And she's a joy. She's a beautiful reality of our family. It is complicated. We have 2 other typical kiddos, Hazel and Anders. So we're a family of 4 today, having lost one. A family of 5 today, having lost one. And it's complicated. I can't count.
Well, thank you just for giving us that sense. Tell us a little bit about like the work of 99 Balloons, and then let's talk about the vision. But like, what on a practical level, what are you all doing through that organization?
Sure. So we primarily work with churches to help them build relationships with people with disability in their community. We do that through a variety of ways. We do that stateside. We do work globally, as I referenced earlier, as well. And so, a couple examples of what we do: we have a night called Recess that we train and equip churches so that they can provide respite for children with the disability, and all their siblings. So the whole kind of serves the whole family. So that's Recess. We have a lot of Recess churches throughout the United States, Canada, Australia. So we get to be a part of a giant community, having a lot of fun, and again, keeping the central focus on helping them build relationships through Recess. And then we have an adult model of ministry called Befriend, a one-to-one friendship model of being paired into relationship with adults with disability. So it's a great filter. We work with some of the best folks.
I bet. So within that, in terms of the vision for 99 Balloons, it's to change the story of disability by proclaiming the worth and image-bearing beauty of each and every human being. That's a tongue twister. Yeah, it is. But so what prompted that sense of a need to change the story of disability?
Yeah. So as I talk and as I gave you my brief history there, I shuffle 3 hats, and sometimes I confuse people because I shuffle them, but I am a father. I am approaching this discussion, and I think of all things disability through being a Christian, through being a theologian, studying, doing some PhD work now with that at Aberdeen, which has been beautiful and fun. So I shuffle between father, kind of theologian, if you will, and someone immersed into it, just commute. I have dozens and dozens of friends with what we'll talk about today. And so I shuffle all of those hats. But why do I think the story of disability needs to change, or why is that the vernacular that we're using? And I think, here's what I think. In America, most people, when they think of disability, they first of all, they don't have a relationship with the person experiencing profound disability, most likely, right here in America. And they think that things are going pretty good, right? They have some basis in their mind of what the past treatment was, and that was bad. And now they think, well, good gracious, people with disability get all the best parking spots. I mean, that's great. That's a good thing. Look how far we've come. Or they might think of their church, and they might hear of some work like what we just talked about. And our church is providing respite for kids with disability in our community. Man, what a cute thing. That's so neat. To be honest, like, I think that is the typical thought process of disability. And as someone, again, immersed in relationships, just totally graced with a community of people with disability, I would say that there absolutely has been great things that have happened over time for my friends with disability, and for rights, and for things that have been championed, and I'm happy about that. But
yeah,
I think, from my view of being a father, and from my view of having many relationships with people with disability, I believe that the story of the disabled community, the story that is happening, whether it be in America or it be right here in our town. You know, I'm in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So right here in my town, the story of disabilities, if you look at it historically and if you look at it currently, has not done a 180 and has not turned around. And that would be that people with disability are marginalized, that people with disability are isolated.
Yeah.
And ours is a world that seeks to eliminate or normalize disability. And what I mean by normalize, that's a particular word in disability space, and I mean something different when I say it. So I gotta put an asterisk. I mean to take the difference away. That the world seeks to eliminate or make normal, gravitate to what we consider normal, towards people with disability. And that is the story that I think must change. I think that people with disabilities have gifts in our churches. I believe they have ministries that we need. And I believe the way to that change is through relationships.
All right. Well, we're going to get to talk about all of those things a little bit more. And I really appreciate that idea. I find this with my children as a parent, that when they are experiencing something that I'm not quite sure how to help them with, some emotion that I can't, or I feel like I either am supposed to fix the problem that is causing them to feel sad or angry, or to minimize the fact that they feel sad or angry. And I feel like that's a little bit what you're saying in terms of, as a culture, we want to either eliminate, like, okay, which in this would be like fix the problem. Like, no, let's just make it go away, or essentially pretend that it's not what it is. And there's a middle way, I have learned as a mother, of saying, I'm so sorry that you feel sad right now, and I'm just going to sit with you in that. Like, and again, that idea of like relationship actually being what we're invited into, and some of those complex, sometimes challenging, sometimes, we've got lives of disability that involve suffering. We've got lives that involve joy. There's all the human emotions and realities. But that idea of like actually sitting together, walking together, being with in the midst of a nuanced, complex, and sometimes hard reality is hard for us as humans. And yet when we do that, I do think there's great like beauty that can come from it. So, all right, sorry, my little soapbox there. I am with you, as you know, in a desire to re-narrate, or as this podcast hints at, reimagine disability. And so I've, for a long time, wanted to talk about how we tell a story of disability. But the recent comments that our, the Director of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr., the comments he made about the autism community are what finally prompted me to reach out to you and say, can we have this conversation? So we're going to insert the a clip here of RFK's comments, so you can all listen along.
This is an individual tragedy as well. Autism destroys families. More importantly, it destroys our greatest resource, which are our children. These are children who should not be suffering like this. These are kids who, many of them were fully functional and regressed because of some environmental exposure into autism when they're 2 years old. And these are kids who will never pay taxes, they'll never hold a job, they'll never play baseball, they'll never write a poem, they'll never go out on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted.
Matt, I just want to ask you, what story of disability do you hear RFK Jr. telling, and where do you think that story comes from?
Well, here we go. First of all, a question you didn't ask, but I do not consider myself a conservative. I do not consider myself a liberal. And I think that's important because this conversation is so tribalized that people are just looking for cues on where's this guy coming from? Which one of those camps is he coming from? And I don't consider myself politically either one of those. I'm going to try to give RFK the widest, biggest amount of grace that I can muster. And to be fair, I do not know that he deserves that. I do not know the guy. There's a million ways I could take it the worst way. I'm going to fill in the gaps with just the best possible scenario.
Yeah.
Which still, by the way, isn't a great story. I love that people are talking about autism. I don't necessarily love the catalyst, but I love that we're talking about it because I believe that the story that RFK is going in front of cameras and putting on the record is the way that most people in America, and dare say most people in our churches, this is the way that they think about disability broadly and autism in particular. And I actually went back to his words. I wanted to actually think a little deeper than I might be tempted to about, what is it they say? So I think he's saying, that autism, and for that matter, probably Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, a little bit broader, most likely, and on, is tragic. It is sad, and it is a terrible thing that needs to be fixed, that needs to be remedied, that needs to be cured in church lingo, that needs to be cured. And while we're at it, the way that the church would kind of spin the exact same thing that he's saying is that disability is a tragic effect of the fall. Mm-hmm. And so, but he continues to go from there because not only is it sad, but it is dangerous. It needs to be eradicated. Mm-hmm. And so his words, it destroys families, destroys children, produces great suffering. So then after kind of hitting the pity button, he goes straight and lays on the good old American meritocracy horn, and he just lays on it. So they will not pay taxes. They will not hold a job. They will not play baseball. And so he conflates very quickly. He's doing a lot of moves, and he conflates the pity. He conflates the worth of people, and he conflates the cause. So when I look at it, I see those three narratives, kind of this pity, sadness narrative, connecting then to the worth narrative, connecting then to the causation. And again, giving him the benefit of the doubt, not putting devil horns on him, but I do think that a lot of people think this way. And I think that you and you're a mom of a child with disability, so many more things, but you're involved in this community. I'm a father. You and I got to know each other at a great camp of our friends called Hope Hills, where we're just surrounded by people with disability. Yeah. And it's beautiful and wonderful. And this is our lives. But I always want to remind people who are in the spaces that we're in and are graced with people with disability in our lives. There was a time when we weren't there. And those relationships, and this is why I'm so passionate about relationships and having actual relationships with people with disability, those relationships changed us. Yeah. And they changed the way we thought. They changed who we are. And so His story is that autism is sad and tragic, and therefore we are responsible to do something about it in order to alleviate the suffering of those with disabilities and their families. And so your second question was, where did this come from? And I certainly, and we might want to do this, you could go historical on that. But I think I kind of want to go to the opposite, just to say, of course he thinks this way. This is the cultural modernity air that we breathe. Again, not many people will state it, but like if you live in the disability community, you come up against this all the time. I can take my daughter to the grocery store, okay? And everybody knows that there's no hidden disability with Lena. She's gonna be doing many things that give you signals that she's got autism, cerebral palsy, and the list keeps going. But I will get this all the time. What a great dad I am.
Mm-hmm.
By taking my daughter to the grocery store, what a great dad I am.
Yeah.
Now, to me, that is super nice, and I'm not going to rip anybody a new one for that. Though, yeah, I am on this podcast about to. But what a pathetic bar that you have for humanity and for me as a father, that you think me taking my daughter with autism to the grocery store makes me a great father. That is the pity tragedy narrative that we encounter and we live out from well-meaning, nice people.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yep.
He is speaking so much of the air that we breathe and the way that people think about disability that often goes unnoticed, unspoken. We're uncomfortable talking about it. And so there is definitely some historical context that is important, but I kind of thought of it the other way.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I want to get back to your story with Eliot and with Lena and 99 Balloons, but I thought it might be helpful to insert here. For me, it has been helpful to have some frameworks for thinking about disability. And the way I've understood that, there are more than these out there in like the scholarly literature, but the two that have been the most helpful for me have been what's called the medical model of disability and the social model of disability. And I'll just spell those out for listeners who aren't familiar with them. So as I understand them, like the medical model is the idea that disability resides within an individual body or mind. And in this model, disability is a problem that needs fixing so that the body or mind can come back to the norm. And I think you've already spoken a lot to that way of understanding disability. There's another way of understanding it called the social model, where disability is a social reality. So you've got a body or a mind that doesn't fit within the structure of our society. So in that realm, the problem, quote unquote, of disability is from the culture. The culture is the problem, shunning, stigmatizing a disabled person, their family. And the problem comes from a world that's not built, whether that is, you are a person who's deaf and you can't understand and communicate, not because you can't understand and communicate, but because the person you're with does not speak sign language. Or we could kind of go down the list, again, historically speaking, and listeners have heard me use this example before, but you use a wheelchair and the curb does not actually have an indentation in it, so you can't get across the street. Is the problem you, or is the problem the way the city has been built? So those to me have been really helpful, partially because I grew up with such a medical understanding of disability, as we've been talking about. And then when Penny came into our lives, I had so many questions about, wait, she does not seem to be the problem here. I don't understand. Like, she's happy. We aren't experiencing a lot of suffering, and we can talk more about that piece of disability in a minute. But, and so I started to also feel really grateful for a bigger understanding of kind of our social perceptions of disability and the part I play in perpetuating a way of being in the world that doesn't make room for Lena or for Penny. And that doesn't, I now assume that I have a lot to gain from knowing Lena, Penny, and on down the list. I did not. That's not how I saw it 20 years ago. I thought they would have a lot to gain by becoming like me, which again, I think is what we're seeing in what are often well-meaning attitudes and comments. So I'm curious, if you could speak a little bit to like the medical model, the social model, if there are helpful and unhelpful aspects of these ways of understanding disability as you see it.
Yeah, I think you explained it well. I think as I think about it, where we locate the problem determines where we locate the solution. So when you locate the problem within the body, the solution is always medical. It's always, well, we need to make that better, get it back to what it could be, or what we think of as good. The medical model is it helps when there's an answer. I think the medical model falls short with so many of our friends with disabilities, and it's not helpful. It's not helpful with long-term, chronic, ongoing things that the medical community can't solve, which is our world. Like that is our world. So the medical model becomes completely unhelpful. But the social model is super helpful, and it's been devised and championed by a lot of disabled self-advocates, the disability rights movement, and by the way, just a note, listen to disabled voices. Like that is when I say relationship, that is the push that I am making, that we would listen to people with disabilities and what they're having to say. And the social model is one of the things over the last few decades that they have had to say. And the social model has produced a lot of good in our society, that the accessibility of buildings and things such as this, they were coming out of this social model. The problem that I'm in a wheelchair is not actually the problem if I can't get in your building. It's that when you built your building, you built 20 stairs, right? So where we locate the problem determines where the solution comes from. So, but the social model, these are just two ways of thinking, and the social model, it falls short a little bit. And I'm going to kind of broaden the discussion of just the social model to it is championed by rights and social justice. Yeah. So when we think of rights and social justice and the social model, then you begin to, particularly as a Christian, you begin to see how the social model falls short. And what I mean by that, a rights-based conversation will never get us to where I believe the church is called to be when it comes to our friends with disability. And when we have a rights-based conversation, what that means in disability space is if you can use your voice and you can assert your rights, then you too have rights in our society, and we will be on board with those rights. The problem with some of that in disability space is there are people with disability who are not going to assert their rights, and they're not going to use their voice on their own behalf. That is not their game. And so that is one kind of issue with the social model. And then just as we think and we talk about, and for me, theologian hat, as we think and we talk about what is the church called to, what is it that we're supposed to do, inclusion and equal rights is the absolute floor for the church, not the aspiration, right? In 1 Corinthians 12, I love this verse. 1 Corinthians 12 says, the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor can the head say to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And on those parts of the body that we think less honorable, we bestow the greater honor. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the world, what they look down on, we're given a word picture of what the body of Christ is. How do you know the body of Christ when you see it in the world? Well, here's how you're going to know it. You're going to know it because they're going to bestow greater honor on the very things that the world looks down on.
Right.
The church's calling is one not of equal rights. The church's calling is one of sacrifice, of laying our own rights down, of esteeming others higher than ourselves, particularly the very ones that the world looks down on. So to me, inclusion is a terrible game for the church. And Hans Reinders is a good reference for this if you're familiar with him.
Yeah.
But when we talk about building, what inclusion can never do, inclusion can get you in the room, but it can't make you have a relationship, a freely given relationship of love. That's not inclusion. That's like way beyond inclusion. And that's the calling of the church with our friends with disabilities, is to know them and to love them and to freely offer relationships whereby we may lay our own rights down. And that's something I never honestly expect the world to do. That's not the world's game. That's the church's game. And let me be the first to say, the church has been terrible at it. And I love the church. I'm part of the church. So I speak as a we, but we've been awful at it.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so much that I want to respond to, and thinking through just so much of it has to do with your vantage point, in the sense, not just of what we were saying about the individual versus the society, but also if we start with that image of the body of Christ and the assumption that everyone has value. And there may be times where we've been culturally conditioned and we cannot understand what that value is, but assuming that that's my problem, like that I am the one who does not have eyes to see, as opposed to, well, then that must mean that unless you change, you're not kind of equal to me or good enough for me or something like that. Since you brought up 1 Corinthians 12 and just the idea of how theologians might understand disability, one thing that has come up over and over and over again in my life as a Christian and as Penny's mom is that many religious people, as you've already mentioned, see disability as a sign of brokenness and the brokenness that exists within our fallen world, kind of pure and simple. And so it really is something that we would want God to cure, whether on this side of heaven or the other. Certainly many non-religious people also see disability as a tragedy or a sign of brokenness from just like a molecular genetic, standpoint. But in either case, that's very different than what we're talking about. But can you speak to like what's problematic, whether it's the secular or the religious view of disability as brokenness?
Yeah, I believe that my friends with disability and the families that I know experiencing disability are a prophetic voice in our world, reminding the world that the good life is not found in how well you navigate away from what you perceive as pain and suffering. The conversation of disability really begins to force, like, what do you really believe and what are you really seeking, and where are your desires, right? Because and that is why relationships with disability, that is why it's such a grace that you have Penny, that I have Lena in our lives, because otherwise we'd be running in a different direction. This is not the direction we would have otherwise run, right? We had to be interrupted. And I'm so thankful that I've been interrupted. But I'll speak to followers of Christ, and listen, the way is narrow. So even though it's popular in America to quote unquote be a Christian, I think it still is, the way is narrow. So, it's one thing to want power and be a Christian. It's another thing to lay it down and to sacrifice. And that's a different calling. But if all that we have to say to the world about disability as followers and believers of Jesus is that it's a tragic effect of the fall, that's not wrong, is what's tricky. And that's what's subtle about that, is it's just really, really missing the point. And what I mean by that, Amy, Julia, you and I, our lives are an effect of the fall, right? But what we mean when we say that is that your life is further removed from ideal than mine. In some way, your life is more tragic than mine.
Right.
And that I will stand up against all day. I do not believe that. I believe.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yep.
Would you say that every human life is a tragic result of the fall?
Absolutely.
And when we only talk that way, when it applies to people with disabilities, we are getting something incredibly wrong in our understanding of what it means to be human.
Yes, you got it. My life is a tragic effect of the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And when I stand my life up against another's and say their life is more, I'm certainly prone to be building an idol factory that looks a lot like me. And that is what happens when we do that. And so, and that is the game. The thing that we have to be aware of, and I responded to RFK's thing on some Instagram, and I got lots of feedback. But it's healthy to disagree, by the way. It's okay. Like in a good world, we should be disagreeing healthily, kind, and loving. I don't mind disagreement. I welcome it. I think it's a good thing. I hope we talk more and disagree more and go deeper with more people. But the church has such a better, more rich story to tell than disability is a tragic effect of the fall. Let me give you another scripture. Deal with this one. Exodus 4. I got to read it. The Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now, that one is tough. That people will maybe struggle with that one. And I have tremendous sympathy and grace for that. That might bring up all sorts of questions for you. But I'm using that to say, in the New Testament, another one, John 3, the disciples, like the good guys, they completely got it wrong. When they came across a person with disability, said, who sinned, this person or his parents? Right. And Jesus looks at them and says, no, like this happened so that the works of God could be displayed. Right. Like you're looking for causation when you should be looking for God. Right. And instead of people with disability or tragic effect of the fall, we as Christians have so much more of a beautiful story to say, hey, God makes human beings in his image. God makes good things.
Yeah.
What might God be saying through the life of this person in front of me? That's so much more biblically sound and also more beautiful.
Right. And I think for me, one of the early lessons that I don't know if it's a lesson I learned or distinctions that became helpful to me was that there's a difference between brokenness and limitation. And in fact, my unquestioned understanding of kind of ideal humanity when Penny was first born was definitely one that really had no limits. It also had no brokenness, whatever that might mean, but had no limits. And I came to believe very differently that actually as humans, we are given limitations, different ones within different ones of us, for a variety of reasons, but that is a part of actually God's good creation. And I don't know where the line is in terms of those limits. I don't know what we say about, there is suffering that is associated often with disability. And I don't believe that is part of God's good design. At the same time, I would not be willing to say that God, exactly what you just read from Exodus, that God has never created someone blind, mute, deaf, with Down syndrome. That's not also a part of God's good creation, because sometimes what I can say is, yeah, there are limits there that I don't experience. And there are also limits that I do experience that lots of other people don't. And I just don't want to be in the business of assessing human brokenness, I guess. And so I think my question for you, I mean, respond however you want, but I am trying to acknowledge the suffering that can be associated with disability. And I think that's some of what RFK was speaking to and wanting to actually do something about that. And yet the way in which he did that, and this often happens, was to diminish the worth, the image-bearing beauty, to use your phrase, of disabled people very broadly. And I don't want to do that either. So how do we talk about suffering and disability while holding on to the inherent worth, keeping away from pity, and not trying to identify a cause that we're supposed to fix?
Yeah, great question. And, when you look at our story, we lost our son. because of disability. Like the worst, most terrible, hardest thing I'm still walking through. Lena, I don't share with the world the hard parts of Lena, not because I don't feel like I can. It's her story and not mine. It's some mine, and I feel free to, if you want to go to coffee with me.
Right.
But I'll suffice it to say, like, Lena has real meltdowns. Lena has self-injurious behaviors. Lena has very hard days that affect our whole family a lot. Yeah. So it is difficult. I want to always be, I am not saying, let's don't pretend like things aren't hard. Let's don't pretend like they're suffering. I'm saying the human life includes hard things and suffering. And if you try to find a way out of it, you become miserable. And if you will live the life that is in front of you, I believe that you can find beauty in that, and that there is meaning and beauty in that. And so I think I'm going to take you, this is through an experience, or through many experiences with dozens of families through 99 Balloons. I'm going to, this one's going to go, we're going to deep dive on this thought. When families get a diagnosis, when families have a child with disability and they're getting that, they go through grief. They should go through grief. The best families that I know that have disability in their family, they have walked through grief because of it. And Ginny and I, my wife and I, define grief as when the reality of life does not meet the expectations that you had. When there's a gap between those two things, there is something to grieve, and you should grieve it. Okay? So our families, I tell them all the time, I get to have this conversation all the time. Man, like, I understand that you're experiencing grief in that. I experience grief in that, and it's okay, because that is a really mind-altering, hard place for a parent to be, because you are on guard and you are already aware from day one, like, well, wait now, like, I love my child with my entire heart. There's not a fiber of my being that doesn't love, and I know you love Penny the same way. There's not a fiber of my being that doesn't love Lena Mooney. I love her so much. And yet, when you have this grief of a diagnosis, and Lena was adopted, so we skipped a little bit of that. It's a little bit different. But when you have that as a family, like we had with Eliot, this is not what I expected. There's a time to grieve that. I think that families experiencing that, I have the utmost grace and love and tender spot for families that are walking through just the hardest things, and those are the ones that got mad at me, right? When I said autism is not tragic, as I said, I took all kinds of bullets from those families. I understand that. I love those families, and I have tremendous grace for what they're experiencing. There is something to grieve there, but that's a very hard concept to walk through, because you love this child with all your heart, and you have something to grieve. So there's just this tension of that. Saying that, having said that, when a family grieves, we should come alongside them in that grief as the church, or just as friends in a community. Like, that is what we should do. But I emphatically think this. That was all the buildup to get to this. Our churches, our societies, and our communities, when they meet our children, they have nothing to grieve. That is not the experience they should be having of our children. They should never have had expectations for what my child and who my child was. The responsibility of our churches and of our society and of our cultures, when they meet our children, is to embrace them, to provide them whatever support they need, to meet them just as they are. Not, and that's where it's off-putting, not to grieve Lena. Because when you start grieving Lena, I'm like, what are you doing? No. Like, in my experience today, day in and day out, is not grief of Lena, right?
Right.
I had to walk through that. That is something I had to go through.
Yeah.
But when she is experienced in the world, that is, so it depends on what part you play in this role. People with disability, the families of people with disability, and the community at large. Those are wildly different spaces.
Yep. And I do think that those postures are part of what create the story of disability that we as families enter into or not. I'm thinking of a woman who actually at Hope Heals Camp told me about attending a church for the first time with her children, both of whom have autism, and one of them had a meltdown as soon as they walked in the door. And so this mom was on the floor with her daughter thinking, oh my gosh, like what is happening right now? And we will never be coming back. And I'm never going to go to church again. And, et cetera. And a woman who was sitting at the welcome table, it's a big church, came over. And again, the mom who's on the floor is being prepared to be kind of ushered out of the building. And the woman from the welcome table got down on the floor, took her arm, looked her in the eye and said, we are so happy you're here. How can I help? And she said, I mean, it just was this like the most beautiful experience. But what was also so interesting is that her child calmed down. There was some measure of like, I'm actually welcome here. The story here is that I belong. And I don't mean there's some like magic solution. If we all just had better attitudes, everyone would have all, there would be no more self-injurious behavior or whatever. But at the same time, I do think that what you are describing just rings so true that if you come to my family with pity or an assumption of grief or those A are distancing me and B, they don't invite me into a way of seeing our lives as part of the goodness of the whole world. And yeah, the complex goodness that involves hardship and suffering for sure. But I don't know. I really appreciate the way you put that. And we're coming to the end of our time. I could talk to you for 7 more hours, which we'll do, I think, at some point. But I wanted to land by just asking, and maybe this is reiterating what we've already said, but why does this matter? Why does it matter that we reimagine disability? What happens in the world if we begin to live with a more expansive understanding of our humanity? What happens in our churches, in our families, in our communities? What do you see as a kind of hoped for reality if the vision of 99 balloons to change the story of disability, if that were to come to be?
Yeah, I firmly believe there's one human story, and they all include some sort of suffering. It's not to wash out the particular stories of suffering with that. We need to learn to listen and sit with one another. But there's one human story, and anything else and anything other than that is othering. And we live in a world that wants to separate itself from any sort of vulnerability. They want to distance themselves from that reality because we're uncomfortable with that. And so in my greatest dream, in the work of 99 Balloons, we would be community building in such a way that both sides of the equation are welcome in just as they are in their humanity. It's not, when you come to 99 Balloon stuff, it's hard to tell who's serving who. And that's the beauty. That's the beauty of a community that allows for all the experiences of humanity. It's like the opposite of a fraternity, right? Like we don't all look alike. We don't all think alike. We didn't all vote alike. Like if you come to 99 Balloons,
totally,
man, you better be ready to engage in conversations on things you never cared about or really wanted to have a conversation about. And that is the beauty, like imagine, just allow yourself to imagine that you might be prone to seek your own happiness in places that make you sad. And you might be, you just might be walking away from some of the greatest, most beautiful possibilities that I believe God wants to put into your life.
Yes. I think for both of us, we've been invited into a story that has more beauty and wonder and misunderstanding, sometimes, again, hardship than we ever imagined. And I'm really, really glad to be a part of that. But it can feel sometimes like I'm, speaking a different language than most of the people. Now, at this point, I've got so many people who know Penny and who know our family that in our little context doesn't feel quite as foreign. But then I do hear or see ways that disability is portrayed more broadly, and I think, oh my gosh, that's so different than how I see it and how I experience it every day.
Well, thank you for who you are, and thank you for what you're doing. Keep going.
And thank you for being here with us and for sharing some of your story, as well as just your thoughts on all of these things. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, as always, for listening to this episode of Reimagining the Good Life. I love hearing from you. Please do email me. It's amyjuliabeckerwriter@gmail.com if you've got comments or suggestions. I'd love for you to share this episode with other people who might benefit from this conversation. I've also got more resources that have to do with disability, faith, family, and reimagining the good life on my website. So please head over to amyjuliabecker.com if you'd like to learn more. If you aren't already a subscriber, I would like to invite you to become one. In the next few episodes, I'm going to be talking with Emily McGowan about households of faith, with theologian Miroslav Volf about the cost of ambition, and with Down syndrome advocate and Lucky Few co-founder Heather Avis about shifting the narrative around Down syndrome and disability. Thank you, Jake Hansen, for editing the podcast. Thank you, Amber Beery, my social media coordinator, for doing everything else to make sure it happens. And thank you, listener, for being here. I hope this conversation helps you to challenge assumptions, proclaim the belovedness of every human being, and envision a world of belonging where everyone matters. Let's reimagine the good life together.